Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram And Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections. In the analysis part, we'll first have a discussion with respect to the future of multilateralism in the context of Mr. Donald Trump being re-elected as the US president. Then, in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to a recent report by the World Bank, which emphasizes the concern with respect to the burden of non-communicable disease and aging population. Then in the simplified section, we'll have a discussion with respect to 5 different articles with special reference to the UPSC Prelims 2025 along with the value addition. So stay tuned. So coming to the very first article of the day, this is with respect to the end of multilateralism. So the re-election of Mr. Donald Trump as the US president, now this has rung alarm bells all over the world because many analysts have been saying that multilateral institutions around the world would face greater challenges in Donald Trump's second term. Now this is because in his first term, which was from 2017 till 21, he took many unilateral actions, right? So we'll see what this construct of multilateralism is all about and what are the implications on the world and on India, right? Now this is a part of GS2, effect of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interest. Now, let's first talk about what do we mean by multilateralism. See, multilateralism is a mechanism. It's a diplomatic approach where what you see is that multiple countries come together. They come together and they discuss the issues of common interest, be it the climate change, be it the trade, be it the global health governance, right? And the discussion which takes place, it is within a framework. It is within a proper framework of rules and regulation, right? So we have got institutions and frameworks within which the discussion takes place. Now, what you need to remember is that this discussion, as I just told you, this decision making actually involves multiple nations, right? So as to address different challenges, be the trade, be the health, and different aspects. Now, if I were to give examples of these multilateral institutions, we have the most prominent as the United Nations, right? Which was primarily established for maintaining international peace and security. Then we have got the World Trade Organization. Then we have got the World Health Organization. These are some of the most prominent multilateral organizations. Now, if I were to go into the evolution of multilateralism, what I would find is that this concept of multilateralism, it has basically changed along with the changing dynamics of the global politics, right? So as what you see was there were changes in the global politics, this construct of multilateralism, it evolved, right? Now, the very first step was taken after the World War II. So the post-World War II and the birth of multilateral institutions. So what we saw is that as soon as the World War II ended, we saw that we had the inception of the United Nations. So that was the very first step of going towards this multilateralism, right? For example, we had the United Nations. Then we had the institutionalization of the Bretton Woods institutions. So we have got 2 Bretton Woods institutions. The first is the International Monetary Fund and the second, now you need to tell me which is the second one. So do answer in the comment section. Then what we also saw was that the establishment of General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. Now this was basically to make a whole structure, to make a whole framework with respect to the trade and tariffs all around the world, right? Next, what we saw was that it was primarily in the Cold War times. So we had the Cold War era in which the world was divided into 2 power blocks. One was led by the United States and the other was led by Soviet Union. So what we saw was that it saw the period of limited multilateralism, right? Primarily because the multilateralism took a backseat, primarily because these alliances, these 2 power blocks, they were ideologically driven, right? So on the one hand, you had the liberal ideology, which was spearheaded by the United States, and on the other hand, what you saw was that you had the Soviet Union, which actually spearheaded the communist ideology. Now, then we also had the institutionalization of various pacts. For example, we had the NATO, we had the Warsaw. So it basically gave a dent to the multilateralism. Now, again, what we need to emphasize is that even then we witnessed some kind of cooperation through the multilateral initiatives. Now, this was primarily in the area of post-war economic development, right? So do remember. Then, if we look at the post-Cold War scenario and the globalization in the years of 1990s, see again, you need to understand, and just before few days we discussed the concept of world order, right? So all these things are interlinked. What you need to understand is that as the Soviet Union disintegrated, what we saw was that United States, it carried on the ideology of liberal international world order, right? And one of the most important pillars was that of the multilateral institutions. So it was a period, the 1990s witnessed a resurgence of multilateralism, right? So what we saw was that the WTO was basically evolved. Now this basically evolved from the initial GATT, right? Then we also saw the expansion of the European Union. Next, this period also witnessed the emergence of new multilateral forums. For example, we had the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. Then there were discussions with respect to the domains of climate change, or in fact the human rights, right? Then what we are witnessing as of now is in the 21st century that renewed challenges have basically come to multilateralism. The very first is what we witnessed was the 2008 global financial crisis. Now, this was a moment which actually tested the resilience of the multilateral institutions, and it was the G20. Because of the G20, significant efforts were made to basically reinvigorate the global economic system, which was affected because of the 2008 global financial crisis. Then what we saw was that this was also the period when we witnessed a growing change in the global power balance, right? So we witnessed the rise of different countries, be it China, be it Russia, be it Germany, or be it India, right? So the power balance was shifted. And because of this, what we witnessed was that there were different institutions, for example, the BRICS, right? Next, what we saw in the period 2017 till 21, in the Trump 1.0 period, what we witnessed was that he took many unilateral actions. For example, he came out of the Paris Accord, right? His administration also took action in the form of coming out from the Iran nuclear deal, right? Next, what we saw, it was in the COVID-19 period. Now, in the COVID-19 period, what we witnessed was that the global health regulation was really very important. We realized that there has to be a very robust health regulatory system in the form of the WHO. But because of the lack of funds, because of the lack of resources with the WHO, proper actions were not taken. Also, there were issues with respect to the vaccine distribution, right? Now, what is the importance of multilateralism? The very first is that it has contributed significantly to the global peace and security. See, we all know that we have the United Nations, and through this, we have the United Nations peacekeeping forces. Now, according to a data of United Nations itself, the United Nations peacekeeping has been successful in promoting peace in conflict zones. For example, in countries like South Sudan or in countries like Mali, in the last one decade, almost 50% of the violence has been reduced because of the United Nations peacekeeping forces, right? Next is, it has played a very important role when we talk about the economic stability and trade. See, we have the World Trade Organization, right? So World Trade Organization, it facilitates trade. It tries to make sure that the trade is free and fair, right? And according to the data of WTO itself, there has been a 25% increase in the overall trade volume between 2010 and 19, right? Primarily because the WTO has focused upon the trade disputes. It has made sure that there is a proper resolution with respect to the trade disputes. It has made sure that there is a reduction in the tariffs, right? Next is the environment and health cooperation. See, what we are witnessing now is the human-induced climate change, what we call as anthropogenic climate change, right? And in order to curb the ill effects of global warming, we had the Paris Agreement, where almost 190 countries came together. So this was also primarily because of the multilateral institutions. Then in the COVID-19, see again, there were many flaws in the management of the overall pandemic. I agree. But what you need to understand, that even then, the institutions like WHO played a very crucial role, right? And it emphasized the importance of the global health systems. Now, what are the challenges being faced by the multilateralism? First, and the very important, is the geopolitical tensions. Geopolitical tensions between different countries, especially between the United States and China, right? So what you need to understand is that because of the strain, see, these two countries are the biggest power in terms of the economy, are the biggest powers in terms of the military. They have a very huge diplomatic capital. So the kind of relations which they have has an influence on the overall geopolitical scenario, on the overall global governance, right? And because of this, what has happened is, because of the tough relations, because of the frictions between the US and the China, there has been strained multilateral platforms, be it the APEC, right, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, or be it the World Trade Organization. Primarily because of the strained relations, what we are witnessing is the inefficiency in these institutions. Also, what you must remember is that it was during the Donald Trump regime that Trump imposed almost 25% tariffs on $300 billion of Chinese goods. Now, this had implications on the overall global supply chain, right? So this is one point which you need to remember. Next is that economic inequality and power imbalance. Now, very important. See, post-World War II, what we witnessed was the conceptualization of these multilateral institutions. But now what we are witnessing is that still, even after so many years, there is a power imbalance. The realities have changed. The global geopolitical realities have changed. We have countries like India, we have countries like Russia, China, who are basically emerging as very strong poles in the world. But still what you're seeing is these multilateral institutions, they are based on the historical context of the post-World War era. So what I'm trying to say is that we have got the institutions like IMF, right? We have got the institutions like World Bank, where still what you see is the domination of the developed countries. See, I agree that there has been a revision of quota in the IMF. But that is still not reflecting the realities, the current realities of the power which we have around the world, right? So what we see is that there is the disproportionate influence in the institutions, right? Next is the COVID-19 pandemic amplified inequality. See, what we witnessed during the COVID-19 pandemic was that there were disparities in the very basic vaccine distribution. Right, so we had the developed countries which basically amassed these vaccines, right? And what we witnessed that because of that, there has been growing inequality since the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have got the World Inequality Lab report, which has specified this, that there has been a widening inequality, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. And the multilateral institutions have not been able to control this widening inequality, right? Next is a rise of unilateralism and nationalism. Now, this is very important. Donald Trump, when he came to power in 2017, he established this concept of America First, right? America First, and where he emphasized that the American foreign policies or the American interests are the one which have to be considered at the first place, right? It has to be prioritized. And because of that, what actually happened was that he came out from the Paris Accord, right? He also came out from the Iran nuclear deal. Then there were also implications on the functioning of the WHO because the funding was stopped to WHO. Then we had the other institutions which were also affected. For example, the UNESCO, for example, the United Nations Human Rights Council, right? Next is the Chinese nationalism. See, again, if we are talking about the weakening of multilateralism, we should not just focus upon the US actions, we should also focus upon the Chinese actions, right? So Chinese have this complex mindset of Middle Kingdom syndrome, right? Where they believe that they are superior to others, right? And this has implications on the global trade. It has implications on diplomatic relations, right? Next is the Brexit. So we also must take into consideration that we had this Brexit. Now this gave a very serious dent to the European Union's cohesion, right? Next is the financial constraints. What we are witnessing now is that there are serious financial constraints when we talk about the United Nations. For example, every year, according to the United Nations, there is a funding gap of almost $1.5 billion in the United Nations peacekeeping forces. Or for that example, take the case of the WHO. So WHO is not being able to implement its policies in different countries because of the lack of funds. Next is inefficiencies and bureaucracy. See, again, the bureaucratic structure in these organizations is such that it is very slow and ineffective. And that leads to minimal returns in the project implementation, right? Also, we have the case of WTO's appellate body. Now, this is paralyzed primarily because of the geopolitical interest of countries like the US, right? So because of that, what is happening is that the WTO is unable to take proper decisions. Proper robust mechanisms are not being able to fructify because of the paralysis which is there in the WTO's appellate body, right? Now, coming to the issues which have been highlighted in the editorial, what it says is that the upcoming multilateral summits, see, we have got 3 upcoming multilateral summits. One is actually ongoing right now. We have got the first, the climate summit, which is ongoing in Baku. Then we have got the APEC forum, which is scheduled to be held in Peru. Then we have the G20 summit, which is scheduled to be held in Brazil. Now, what the author is saying is that because of the Donald Trump's re-election, these summits, the future of these summits, it remains dark, right? It remains dark. Primarily because, as I told you, the inclination of Mr. Donald Trump in taking unilateral actions. He doesn't believe in multilateral forums, right? Now, impact of Trump's foreign policy, as we have just studied. So, what it is saying that there has been a shift from multilateralism in the Trump 1.0 period, that was from 2017 till 2021. He basically promoted this concept of America First. He came out of the Paris Agreement. Then he also came out from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Then he also came out from the UNESCO. Then WHO funding was stopped. And then he also criticized the United Nations Human Rights Council. Then what you need to understand is that there has been also a domestic voice in the US. See, again, political actions are taken on the basis of what the people at large think, right? So we have got the domestic voices in the US, which have been raising voices. And they have been saying that because of the multilateralism, what it has led to growth in the trade, and that has led to job losses in the US, right? Then what the domestic voices also say is that because of the prolonged military interventions, be it the Middle East, be it Afghanistan, what they have been saying is that it has led to huge economic losses for the US, right? Next is the potential implications of Trump 2.0, that is this present term. So what the analysts have been saying is that it is expected that Mr. Donald Trump would exit from the Paris Agreement, and he would also reduce the constraints which are imposed on the United States energy companies, right? So we have got the limitations which are imposed as of now, primarily to curb the greenhouse gas emissions, right? So what we are actually seeing is that there is a possibility so that these reductions would be reduced on these companies. Focus would be on traditional energy, be it the coal, may encourage other countries to scale back. Again, see, please understand that what Donald Trump is saying that we need to again emerge as the superpower in the technological domain, be it the artificial intelligence, be it machine learning. Now, these are the technological areas which require huge power, right? And that is the reason what Mr. Trump is saying is that we will invest in traditional energy, be it the coal or whatever. Next is, it is also giving an implication that many other countries would follow up seeing America's action. So you must remember that it was Brazil. So it was in Mr. Bolsonaro's term as the Brazil's president, that what Brazil saw was that it scaled back on its climate commitments which it made, right? Next is challenges for key multilateral institutions. So the article talks about 2 multilateral institutions. First is APEC. Now, initially this was formed so as to foster the economic relations between China and US, right? But now what we are seeing is that it is facing rising US-China tensions. And again, US already withdrew from the Trans-Pacific partnerships, and now there's a potential of imposing 60% tariffs on Chinese imports. So Trump has basically indicated this. Again, Trump has also said that the US would keep an eye on Chinese approaches or Chinese interventions in the Latin America. So China has been penetrating in Latin America primarily to source the critical minerals. It has been engaging the countries of Latin America in debt trap diplomacy, right? So now what US has said is that we will closely observe what Chinese are doing in Latin America. Next, G20. See, G20 primarily, it was formed in 2008 and it was able to solve the global financial crisis. But again, as of now, what it is witnessing is deepening divides on trade, climate and migration. Next is decline of global collective solutions. See, again, multilateralism witnessed the peak in early 2000s. But now it is actually faltering, it is waning. Then the new focus has been shifted to the bilateral and minilateral alliances. Now you need to understand, if a country doesn't see potential in the multilateral setup, it primarily tries to switch to other forms of cooperation, be it bilateral or be it minilateral alliances. what India has been doing. See, India has been coming into economic partnerships, be it the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, which it has made with United Arab Emirates, UAE, or be it the similar agreements which it has made with other countries. Then it has also come into security, some sort of security arrangements. For example, we have got the Quad, which focuses upon making sure that the regional security architecture remains same. Or for example, the Mineral Security Partnership, or for example, the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, so as to make sure that there is a proper framework with respect to the artificial intelligence, emerging technologies. And therefore, we have got the Artemis Accord. Now, you need to tell me, what is this Artemis Accord, right? Now, what should be the way forward with respect to multilateralism? See, the very first is the strengthening of unilateral and regional alliances. Again, if the multilateral institutions are not faring better, especially for the developing and the least developing countries, they should come together and form these unilateral and regional alliances, what the countries have already been doing. So what we also call them as like-minded coalitions. So countries can come and then cooperate. For example, we have got the Quad, which focuses upon maintaining the free and open Indo-Pacific, right? Then we have got the International Solar Alliance. Then we have got, for example, the BRICS, right? Which also focuses upon the regional development, which is saying that it is the voice of the global South, right? And then it also focuses upon innovation aspects. Next aspect is reforming the international institutions. Now, this is very important. Until and unless the multilateral institutions, they are reformed, which reflect the realities of the current world order, the countries are not going to be a part of them, right? So what we need to see is that, for example, we have got the United Nations Security Council. So it has to be reformed, because see, again, that is basically made in the form of a post-World War order, right? It only reflects the power realities of that time, but it is not reflecting the power realities of now. So we also have the countries like G4. Now, you need to tell me which are these 4 countries which are known as G4, which are saying that they want to be a part of the expanded United Nations Security Council. Now, this would help increase in the representation and would reflect clearly the geopolitical realities. Next is revisiting the WTO's dispute resolution process. Now, this is very important. The dispute resolution process of the WTO has to be made more robust so that it can enhance the trade, so that it can make the trade more robust, right? It can make the trade more smooth, right? Disputes can be resolved. Then we need to invest greater in the sustainable development goals. Now, this is very important. See, especially as I told you, after COVID-19, there has been deepening inequalities among different countries. So as to reduce these inequalities, what we need to focus upon is increasing the funding for the sustainable development goals. Countries should prioritize making sure that these sustainable development goals are achieved by 2030. Also, we have got the United Nations Development Program, which says that annually there is a requirement of almost $5 to $7 trillion. There has to be a funding of $5 to $7 trillion in order to realize these goals by 2030, right? Next is digital and technological cooperation. Now, this is very important. As we are seeing the disruptive technologies, there have been growing challenges with respect to health, be it the pandemic, be it the other things. There is a need for digital and technological cooperation. So, as I said, that in the face of climate change and global health crisis, see, we are witnessing climate change. Now, we have to have more renewable, more cleaner forms of energy, right? Over there, technological cooperation becomes really important. Right. So technology initiatives are really important. For example, India has started with the International Solar Alliance, right? So it is a step which other countries should also take. Next is, for example, we have got the COVAX initiative, which focuses upon more equitable distribution of the vaccines around the world. And then we have got the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence. So such framework need to be established in order to have a proper guidelines, in order to have a proper structure with respect to these technologies in particular, be it artificial intelligence or quantum computing or whatever, so that the benefits can be shared by different countries and there can be equitable development. See, again, what we are trying to say is that multilateralism, see, it primarily evolved as a tool for post-World War recovery, right? Then what happened was that it then became into a structure, a mechanism to deal with the global challenges, be it the climate change, be it the trade disputes. Now what we are seeing is that these multilateral institutions, they are suffering from the crisis of credibility, right? What in political science, we also study the legitimation crisis. So what we are trying to say is these institutions should be given sufficient credibility. How? By making sure that they are more reflective of the current geopolitical order, right? what we are trying to emphasize is that the global governance framework has to be made more equitable and more inclusive, right? Where the needs of developing and least developed countries are taken into account. So that is what you need to know with respect to this particular article. Now, let's have a mains practice question. The question says, in the light of recent global developments, discuss the notion of end of multilateralism, analyze the factors contributing to its perceived decline, and suggest ways for reinvigorating international cooperation to address the common global challenges. 15 marks, 250 works. Do write a particular answer on this question. So coming to the second article, this is with respect to the burden of non-communicable diseases and the aging population. So we have a particular report by the World Bank which was published in September 2024. Now this emphasizes the demographic transformations which are taking place, and it has highlighted the growth in the aging population. Along with that, it has also highlighted the growth in the non-communicable diseases, which are now the leading cause of deaths around the world, right? So this gives us the opportunity to talk about the burden of non-communicable disease, the aging population, and what should be the way forward. Now, this is with respect to GS2, social sector and health. Now this particular report by the World Bank, which focused upon the longevity and health, it primarily focused upon this demographic transition which is taking place. That is the growth in the proportion of the senior citizens, the aged population, right? And this is taking place around the world, primarily in the developing countries, right? And the burden of non-communicable diseases, and the special reference has been made to low and middle income countries, including India, right? Again, what this is emphasizing is that there is a global increase in the elderly population, primarily in the low and middle income countries, and the low and middle income countries, they are actually witnessing a rapid rise with respect to these aged population, right? Now, the non-communicable disease, it is becoming one of the leading causes of death in these low and middle income countries. So if you just look at this graph, you will see that the proportion of deaths due to the NCDs, now it is projected, now the data is from 2019 and it is projected that what would be the scenario in 2040. So if you just look at the low income countries, the proportion of deaths because of the NCDs, it was 42% in the year 2019. Now this is supposed to go to 74% by the year 2040. Look at the same number for low middle income countries, right? So this was 63% in 2019 and it is projected to go to 90%. So 90% of the overall deaths would be because of the NCDs in 2040. Then the same number is 93 for upper middle income countries. Then the same number is 88% for the high income countries. So what we are trying to emphasize is that there is, and if you just look at the global number, it is 90%. It would be 90% because of the non-communicable disease in the year 2040. So what we are trying to emphasize is that there has been a growing burden with respect to the non-communicable diseases. For example, we have the cancer, we have the cardiovascular disease, we have diabetes, we have stroke, we have what? The chronic lung disease. So these are all non-communicable diseases, right? Now again, the report itself says that the world population is rapidly aging, and by 2050, 1 in 3 people in the world will be over the age of 60, right? So developing countries will bear the brunt of this demographic shift, presenting both challenges and opportunities. Opportunities in the form of silver economy, which we have discussed in the previous analyst sessions, right? Now, if you just look at the Indian scenario, what you will see is that India is a country which has a second largest elderly population globally. So the number of elderly population is around 140 million as of now. And the rate of the growth of the elderly population in India, it is almost 3 times the national population growth. Just look at this picture, right? So in the period from 2011 till 21, the growth rate of the overall population was 12.4%. Now this was 35.8% decadal growth rate for the senior citizens, for the elderly population, right? And this is projected from 2021 31 that is going to be 8.4 for the general population and 40.5% for the aged population, for the elderly population, right? Again, what the report says is that there has been the rising cases of the non-communicable disease among the elderly, and this poses serious financial burdens on the families. Please understand that in India, we don't have a robust social security architecture, right? Or a pension system, which obviously aggravates the condition, the health condition of these elderly people, right? The non-communicable disease projections, it says that by 2030, NCDs, the non-communicable diseases, they are expected to account almost 75% of the all deaths in India. Now, this was 40% in the year 1990, right? So, almost 75% of the overall deaths which would take place in 2030, they would be because of the non-communicable diseases. Now, what are the factors which are contributing to high NCDs? See, again, what we are saying is that there are insufficient social schemes. See, again, since independence, India has made great strides when we talk about the overall improving the overall social setup in the country, right? But again, as of now, what we are saying is that these social schemes, they cater to very limited sections of the society. The majority of the society, the majority of the sections of the society, they are left behind and they do not get access to the benefits of these schemes, right? And which ultimately incurs high out-of-pocket expenditure. So the person in the end has to bear the high out-of-pocket expenditure on his own. Then there are issues with respect to high travel, treatment and medicine expenses. See, please understand that if you have a person who is suffering from these serious illnesses, he or she will have to come to some of the serious specialist facilities, right? And these are basically in the metropolitan cities in the country. So they have to travel a long distance from the rural countryside areas to these cities, and which obviously has the implications in the form of the overall cost, which is actually borne by them, right? Then what we are seeing is that it leads to the growing indebtedness among these patients, right? Also, we have got the report by the Comptroller and Auditor General. It says that though Ayushman Bharat is trying to basically cover all the segments of the society, again, there are issues with respect to the funding, insufficient funding and administrative delays. Again, what is not mentioned here is that there are also issues with respect to the health insurance schemes. So these health insurance schemes, they are having some of these issues where timely payments are not made to the hospitals, or where there is a nexus between the hospital and these insurance providers. Ultimately, this harms the end consumer, the patient in the end, right? Now, what are the risk factors for these non-communicable diseases? First is that there has been the growth. See, as disposable incomes have increased, there has been increase in the rise of processed foods. And these processed foods, they are very high in salt and sugar content, right? They are very refined, what we call refined foods, right? So these refined grains, red meats and fats, they contribute to increased risks of these NCDs. It leads to blockages in the arteries, which leads to heart disease, or let's say the stroke, right? Then what we see is that there are age-related risks. Then there are issues with respect to the behaviors, right? So the behavior is such that people are having more and more sedentary lifestyle. Then the genetic predispositions also play a role. So if you have the lineage, if you have the genes which are basically more prone to such disease, then obviously you will have the generations which would basically have this risks of these disease, right? Next is the high obesity rates and the tobacco use further exacerbate the NCD prevalence. So if you just see that NCDs are preventable by reducing common risk factors. What are the risk factors? We have physical inactivity, we have tobacco use, we have harmful alcohol use, then we have got eating unhealthy diets, right? Now, considering all this, the World Bank has come with a particular initiative, which it says the Healthy Longevity Initiative. Now, this primarily focuses upon four aspects. First is, it tries to make sure to reduce the avoidable deaths and disability which is caused because of the non-communicable diseases. Second, it tries to reduce the poverty and gender inequality. Third, it is focusing upon improving the overall well-being, right? Next, it improves the productivity, choice and equity in paid work, right? So these are the four aspects where the goals of the Healthy Longevity Initiative. So to reduce the avoidable deaths and disabilities, improve physical and mental well-being, and minimize the period of severe illness before death. Now, what should be the way forward in order to deal with these two concerns? That is, rise in the aged population and elderly population, and the growth of the NCDs, non-communicable disease. First, it was in February 2024 that the Supreme Court, Honorable Supreme Court, it directed that there has to be a regulation when it comes to the hospital procedures so as to curb the high healthcare costs. Please understand, the demography of the country says that the economic status of majority of the people is poor, right? Is weak purchasing power, right? So therefore, what we need to emphasize is that there has to be a structure. There has to be a structure where the overall health cost, they do not basically bear a burden on this sections of the society, primarily the patients and the aged population, right? Next is, we have to focus upon the behavioral changes. So behavioral changes means encouraging physical activity or eating more balanced diet, which is rich in millets, for example, right? Reducing tobacco use. Now, these are vital. Then there have to be significant policy reforms, right? So there has to be reforms in the overall health setup. So we can actually think about universal health coverage, or we can also make sure that different social schemes, they are made more inclusive in nature, right? They are made more participatory in nature. So you've got different sections of the society, not just the poor, but also low income households, right? So low income households should also be a part of these schemes, right? So what are the recommendations which are actually proposed by the World Bank? So we have got, first is adopt high impact fiscal, public health and clinical interventions to prevent and manage the NCDs. So for example, we can have different schemes. For example, we can have taxes on tobacco, alcohol, sugary beverages to reduce the disease and raise fiscal resources. Next, integrate cost-effective clinical services into primary and first referral facilities. Now, this is very important. We have to make the primary healthcare facilities more robust, right? So that the disease can be detected early and adequate actions can be taken place. Then provide financial protection and address the long-term needs. For example, adopt financial protection strategies for the poorest and most vulnerable, including the women. Then lower the cost and expand the availability of long-term care, including the community-based care. Now, this is also important. Next is promote data and global public goods. This is important. Invest in data systems. See, again, we have, for example, in India, the disease surveillance mechanism. So this is very important. So if a particular disease is growing in a particular locality, the government can take specific action with respect to that particular region, right? That is what the importance of disease surveillance is all about. Open data and dashboards to track the performance and provide accountability. Create and fund global public goods for healthy longevity, such as scientific research, pricing mechanisms, drugs, and medical treatments. So these are some of the general recommendations which are given by the World Bank. Again, what we are trying to say is that we have a situation where demographic transition is taking place. There is a growth in the proportion of the elderly population. Along with that, there is the burden of the non-communicable disease. So we need to have a multi-pronged policy where it caters to not just the aging population, but also different aspects of the health, right? Also, we have this construct of the One Health approach, right? Which is a holistic set of principles and actions which are taken to improve the overall well-being, right? Which includes the animal health also, right? So what we're trying to focus is that these actions should be taken, and whatever social policies are taken by the state, they have to be made more inclusive and more equitable, so that these vulnerable sections of the society can be protected from such events, right? So that is what you need to know with respect to this particular article. Before we go to the next topic, here's a mains question. The rising burden of non-communicable disease and an aging population poses significant socio-economic challenges in India. In this context, highlight the importance of healthy longevity initiative and suggest ways to effectively deal with the challenges of NCDs and aging population. So do write a particular answer on this question. So coming to the simplified section, we have got the first article where the Minister for External Affairs has said that though there have been challenges with respect to the trade ties between India and Russia, but significant progress has been made, right? So challenges with respect to the trade ties between India and Russia remains, especially in regards to the payments and logistics, but perceptible progress has been made. Now, this article becomes important not because what exactly the Minister for External Affairs has said, but because it mentions some of the very key terms which can be important for your prelims, right? So we'll try to emphasize and elaborate upon those terms, right? So we have got the Russian First Deputy Prime Minister. He said that in the past 5 years, the trade turnover had grown more than 5-fold, and India was now the second country among all the foreign partners of Russia. International North-South Transport Corridor, Chennai-Vladivostok Corridor, and Northern Sea Route. We'll see what these three initiatives are all about. Cooperation, critical for our food, energy, and health security. Russia is a major source for fertilizer. Supply of crude oil, coal, uranium are indeed important. Then India's pharmaceutical industry has emerged as an affordable and reliable source for Russia. So this discussion was primarily taking place on the occasion of 25th session of the India-Russia Intergovernmental Commission on Trade, Economic, Scientific, Technological, and Cultural Cooperation. This is a very important body, do remember. Again, what the leaders have said is that we will achieve the trade target of $100 billion by 2030. Before that, in fact, well before that, the growth in bilateral trade to $66 billion has been impressive and needs to be more balanced and more facilitative, right? Now, again, what they have also talked about the bottlenecks, right? The issues which are plaguing the trade ties. So war in Ukraine and Russia's ouster from the international SWIFT payment system. Now, SWIFT payment system becomes really important. We'll have a look. Payment systems have emerged as a major bottlenecks, right? Even India's oil imports from Russia increased manifold, trying to increase the rupee-ruble trade. Vostro accounts, this also becomes important. We'll see what this is all about. Encourage businesses to trade in local currencies. Signing off the free trade agreement between the Eurasian Economic Union and India, bilateral agreement on services and investments, it is also in the pipeline. Let's see what would happen. Now, let's first talk about the International North-South Transport Corridor. So this aims to establish a multimodal connectivity, right? So we have got the rail, sea and road links. So if you just see that it is connecting India with that of Russia, right? So we had this standard route which takes place through the Arabian Sea, then the Red Sea, and then we have got the Mediterranean Sea, and then we have got connecting to the European part. But that is a very long route. So in order to have a more economic route, we have got this particular route which starts from India, that is from Bombay, and then it goes into Russia, traversing through different countries, right? So this reduces the travel time and the cost for the cargo between India, Iran, Russia and other countries in the Caucasus and Central Asia. Now you need to tell me what are the countries in the Caucasus region. So we have got the Caucasus region here. You need to tell me the countries which are there in the Caucasus region. Now this begins in India, traverses the Arabian Sea to Iran's Bandar Abbas, moves through north of Iran and Caspian Sea, then reaches Russia, connecting Europe via rail. Now what are the key benefits? First is cost and time efficiency. Estimated 30% reduction in the transit costs and almost 40% reduction in the time compared to the traditional Suez Canal route. Next is trade expansion. Enhanced connectivity fosters trade links between India, Russia and Central Asia, and then it promotes relations in terms of having new markets, the trade, it prospers the trades. Next is strategic significance. It reduces the dependency on the Suez Canal and promotes greater economic interdependence for the member countries. What is the current status? So the corridor is functional in different segments, not fully operational, with significant progress in Russia and Iran on infrastructure development. Next is Chennai-Vladivostok Maritime Corridor. Very important. The reason I have emphasized these topics is because it can be really important for your prelims, right? So the objective is primarily to establish a direct maritime route between the Indian port city of Chennai and Russia's far eastern port city of Vladivostok. Just see in this map, we have got the connection between Chennai and Vladivostok, right? So existing route, as I just told you, it is a very long route and it starts from port of Mumbai to St. Petersburg in Russia. And it's almost of 8,675 miles. But the proposed route, the new route is from Chennai to Vladivostok in the Russia's Far East region, right? And this is a shorter route, which is of 5,647 miles, right? Port of Chennai to Port of Vladivostok. Now, strategic importance of this particular route, energy security. See, please understand, the Far East region of Russia, right? It is rich in resources. For example, we have got the oil, the natural gas, the minerals. And this corridor, once fully established, would lead to facilitation of energy imports from Russia to India, diversifying the supply chains. Then it would also lead to trade enhancement. So it streamlines trade between India and Russia by creating a shorter route, bypassing Europe and Suez Canal, thereby reducing the cost and transit time. Next, it also exerts regional influence. So it enhances India's presence in the Indo-Pacific and strengthens its strategic partnership with Russia. What is the current status? It's still in the planning stages, though joint statement indicate the commitment to realizing the project. Now, next is the Northern Sea Route. See, the objective of Northern Sea Route is to establish the shipping route along the Russia's Arctic coast, right? From the Bering Strait to the Barents Sea, providing significantly shorter path between Europe and Asia. See, this is the present route. We have got the existing route which starts from here, from the Vladivostok, and then it goes to Strait of Malacca. Then it passes through the Red Sea and then through Mediterranean. So it's a very long route. Now what we are focusing on this, the Northern Sea route, which is much shorter. So it starts from the Bering Strait, right? So from Vladivostok, it goes through the Bering Strait. This separates the Arctic Ocean with that of the Pacific Ocean. And then over here, if you just see, over here you have got the Barents Sea. So it connects the Barents Sea and then further to the other countries, Scandinavian countries, right? So strategic importance, shorter transit times. So we have got, it reduces the distance between Asia and Europe by almost 40% compared to the Suez Canal route, which would obviously drastically cut the shipping times. Next, economic potential. See, please understand, Russia's development of Northern Sea route, it is basically infusing. Russia is greatly investing in this particular route because this is also of strategic importance for Russia, right? In icebreakers, port facilities, and Arctic infrastructure aiming to capitalize on shorter trade routes due to melting ice caps. Environmental concerns are there. See, this is a particular region which is environmentally fragile region, right? So increased shipping in the Arctic raises concerns about the environment impacts, including the oil spills and effects on the marine life in a sensitive ecological zone. What is the current status? Operational but seasonally dependent on the ice conditions. So Russia has plans to expand the Northern Sea route capabilities to make it navigable year-round by 2030. Now all these three, be it the International North-South Transit Corridor, the second is the Chennai-Vladivostok corridor, and the third is Northern Sea route. They are three very important initiatives when you talk about connecting Asia with that of Europe, right? And making the reducing the transit times, reducing the overall cost when we talk about the overall trade. So these can be really important. Now, what is SWIFT system? See, SWIFT stands for the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. Now, this is a global messaging network. Please understand, you don't transfer money with the help of the SWIFT system. It is just a messaging platform, right? Used by banks and financial institutions for secure communication of the payment instructions and transactions. Now, this was founded in the year 1973 and is headquartered in Belgium. It connects more than 11,000 financial institutions worldwide. What is the functionality of the SWIFT system? First is secure communications. So the SWIFT facilitates secure, standardized communication between banks, enabling smooth international transactions, including payment transfers, trade finance, and security trading. Then we have got the specific codes known as bank identifier codes, right? BIC, bank identifier codes. Now, using these codes, see again, every financial institutions in different country, it has a specific code, which is a part of the SWIFT. If you have a financial institution, if it is a part of the SWIFT, it would be having its own code, which is known as BIC, bank identifier code, right? Now, this enhances the credibility of that particular institution, globally allowing accurate routing of payments across the borders. Then we have got transaction reliability. So while SWIFT doesn't handle the transfer of funds itself, please understand, this is very important. There can be a question in the prelims where it says that the SWIFT system manages the transfer of funds on its own. No, this is incorrect. So it's only a messaging platform, right? It provides a secure messaging framework that banks use to conduct and verify transactions, reducing fraud and errors in the cross-border payments. This is what the SWIFT system is. The Western countries have imposed sanctions and have ousted the Russia from the SWIFT system. Therefore, the Russia is facing issues with respect to the international payments. Next is Vostro accounts, very important. So Vostro is basically a Latin term which means your. Now this signifies that your account in our books. For instance, if you have an Indian bank, right, and if it holds an account in the US bank in the Indian rupees, it is a Vostro account in that particular US bank, right? So why this is important is because that the kind of trade which India and Russia are having, that is basically using the Vostro accounts. So it facilitates the cross-border trades. Vostro accounts enable foreign banks to conduct transactions in the local currencies, supporting cross-border trade and remittances without the need for direct currency conversion. Why there's a need for Vostro accounts? Because of the sanctions which are imposed by the Western countries on the Russia, right? So therefore, we have another mechanism, that is the Vostro accounts. Again, the example is there. So an Indian bank holding a Vostro account in Russian bank allows the Russian bank to conduct transaction in Indian rupees, simplifying the trade between the two countries without involving the United States dollar, right? So it is also leading to this, what we call as de-dollarization, right? Sanctions circumvention. So Vostro accounts have recently gained attention as they allow countries under sanctions to continue trade in alternative currencies, bypassing the reliance on major currencies like US dollar. Again, there's a mention of a very important organization, which is Eurasian Economic Union. So what you need to understand is that it is a political and economic union of several countries located in Eurasia, right? Established to foster regional integration and free trade and other aspects, right? So this was established in January 2015. Now, again, the current members of the Eurasian Economic Union, it includes Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan. Observer states are Moldova and Uzbekistan. Primary goal of EAEU is to create single market for goods, services, capital, and labor, along with coordinated economic policies among different members. Then economic integration and trade. So it focuses upon a free trade area. The EAEU aims at to form the common economic space with a free trade agreement removing tariffs and non-tariffs barrier between different member countries. Customs Union. The EAEU maintains a unified customs policy and members have a common external tariff. So it is a custom union also for the non-member countries. Then regulatory harmonization. There's an effort to align the regulations in the areas like technical standards, labor laws, and even intellectual property, including the environment standards also, to facilitate easier cross-border business operations. Political and strategic importance. So first is geopolitical significance. See, this is seen as a counterbalance. This is primarily a Russia-led initiative, and this is being seen as something which is to counterbalance the influence of European Union and aims to consolidate economic power within the region. It also serves as a platform for Russia to extend its influence in the former Soviet space, right? Former Soviet colonies, acting as geopolitical entity that separates from EU and NATO. Belt and Road Initiative. The EAEU is strategically important in the context of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which seeks to connect Asia, Europe, and Africa through infrastructure investments. The Union cooperates with China on several infrastructure and trade projects. Again, what are the challenges and criticism? First is economic disparities. There are wide disparities among different participating countries in EAEU. For example, there are significant economic disparities between member states, especially between Russia and smaller economies like Kyrgyzstan and Armenia. This disparity can create challenges in achieving deeper economic integrations. Then it is primarily dependent on Russia. Critics argued that Russia holds dominant position in this particular organization, making the smaller members highly dependent on Russian economic and political decisions. External relations. The EAU's relationship with other global economic power like the European Union or United States have been strained, particularly with regard to sanctions and trade agreements, right? So this is what you need to know with respect to this particular article. So coming to the next article, this is with respect to the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. Now this article tries to give a progress report with respect to this particular corridor. So let's first talk about this particular corridor. So this tries to connect India with Europe via the Middle East, right? So you can see that there is the prevalence of the sea route and also the rail route. So it starts from Mumbai and Gujarat, and then it goes to UAE, then it traverses through the road routes within the Saudi Arabia, then it traverses to the port of Haifa in Israel, and then further through the sea route to the Piraeus port in Greece. That is what the overall linkages are all about. Now let's talk about this particular corridor. So it was announced during the G20 summit in New Delhi in September 23. India, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, EU, and the US are the participating countries. The overall objective is to strengthen the economic connectivity and facilitate trade, energy, digital cooperation between India, Middle East, and Europe. What are the components of IMEC? As we just saw, that there is the railway network, so it connects the Middle Eastern countries, enhancing the regional connectivity. Then sea linkages are also there, facilitates maritime trade between India and Middle East with onward connections to Europe. Then we have got the energy infrastructure, includes pipeline to transport renewable energy and hydrogen across the different regions. Then we have got the digital infrastructure, enhances high-speed data links and fiber optic connectivity, supporting digital trade and innovation, right? Now, what is the strategic importance of this particular initiative? First is economic growth. See, it is trying to enhance, to boost the trade and development across the participating countries by reducing the overall transportation time and costs. Second is that it is trying to exert the geopolitical influence. in the form that it is presenting an alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative by offering US and EU backed infrastructure model. Next is it also aims to have energy security, especially for a country like India, which is energy dependent, highly energy dependent. So helps in diversifying the energy sources, especially renewable energy, and meets regional energy needs sustainably. What are the benefits for India? Export growth. Now, it would offer India new markets, so easier access to markets in the Middle East and Europe. Then job creation. Obviously, once you'll have the project which is going on, it would lead to the creation of infrastructure, and then it would lead to more jobs. Infrastructure projects, particularly in transport and energy, likely to generate employment. Then you have got digital expansion, opportunities for India's tech sector in Middle Eastern and European markets, right? What are the challenges? First is political instability. What we are witnessing in West Asia is a turmoil, a perfect turmoil, which has led to the loss of lives of many innocent civilians, right? Primarily, it is the effect of the October 7, right, incident which took place. Now, Israel is actually responding very harshly, and that actually leads to a situation where the West Asia is in a very turmoil situation, and that is obviously not good for the project, right? Possible risks in politically sensitive regions. High costs, extensive financial and logistic resources are required in order to implement this particular project. Coordination. Success, it basically depends upon the coordinated policies and continuous cooperation among different countries. What are the future prospects? IMEC could reshape the global trade patterns. It can enable more stable and diversified supply chains and position India as a central hub in the growing transcontinental trade network, right? Now, what this article says is, it's a very simple article, and it tries to say that there are basically two aspects of this project. First is the western part and the eastern part. It's saying that the eastern part has developed quite well, right, with the trade between the UAE and India growing well, but the western part is actually suffering because of these turmoils which are taking place in the West Asia. So it is primarily trying to emphasize it. So in September 23, the ambitious transcontinental India Middle East Economic Corridor was announced on the sidelines of the G20 summit. The proposed corridor is expected to reduce the transit times between its western and eastern nodes by 40% and costs by 30%. So we have got, if we compare it with the original route, that is the Suez Canal route, it would reduce the travel time and the cost by almost 40% and 30% respectively. The new corridor, once operational, will be a game changer for the international maritime trade. What are the challenges? So there have been various challenges which have delayed the progress. The very premise which led to the conception of this idea, namely the normalization of the Arab-Israel relations, has come to a sudden halt with the escalation of the conflict between Israel and Palestine because of the October 7 attack by Hamas, right? This has engulfed the whole West Asia, and it has put the corridor on the back burner, right? Two key stakeholders, that is Saudi Arabia and Jordan, have not been able to make any progress on the project. Therefore, the implementation of the northern part of the project, which is mostly the West Asia, is going to move slowly until ongoing escalation subsides. Now, on the eastern leg, what we see is the corridor connecting the UAE and India. Things are moving forward at a relatively fast pace. The economic relations of the two countries are moving on a good level, right? Increasing the bilateral trade numbers. So we also signed the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, right? So the bilateral trade has increased from $43 billion in 2020-21 to $83.64 billion in 23-24. Another important feature is that there is the diversification. It's not just about the oil trade which is taking place. It's about the other products also, right? Reflected the growing non-oil trade. The non-oil trade between India and UAE, it grew from $28.67 billion in 2021 to $57.81 billion in 23-24. Now, this basically signifies healthy shifts from an Indian perspective, considering that most of these commodities will be transported further west and north through the IMEC, improving India's export share. Two countries are also working on the standardization and facilitation of the trade processes. So we have got the institutionalization of the virtual trade corridor. Now this would be an integral part of the IMEC. Now this would lead to reduction of the administrative processes and time, reduction of logistics and transportation costs, ease of doing trade, right? The streamlining of the trade processes not only serve the bilateral relations, but also paves the way for providing a working model for other countries to develop a similar framework. Next aspect is that after more than a year since IMEC was announced, the uncertain western part of the corridor trying to navigate through the conflict and a committed eastern part is forging new linkages in the new maritime order, right? Only the connectivity aspect of the IMEC is gaining some traction. Again, there is one point which you have to consider, that we are only considering the connectivity aspect. Other aspects are not being looked into. For example, other elements of the corridor, that is including clean energy export, undersea fiber optic cables, pipelines, energy grid linkages, telecommunication lines, and clean energy technology cooperation will have to wait till the situation in West Asia normalizes. So these are the aspects where we have to focus. We have to focus more, right? The eastern part of the corridor should use this time to develop their capacity to improve connectivity among them. So that is what the article is talking about. Next aspect is what India can do. So what the authors are saying, that India should use this time to prepare its ports, develop the specific economic zones, different connectivity nodes, improve the domestic logistics, and seamless integration with the IMEC. Again, till the situation in the West Asia normalizes, the authors are saying that India should focus upon enhancing its efficiency when we talk about the overall logistics, right? There's a need to improve the digital footprint in the domestic logistics landscape, and this would help reduce the logistics time and costs. Indian exports, and therefore it would make the Indian exports more competitive. So the corridor is just the means. The actual benefits will be seen if India can improve its integration in the global value chains. So it has to increase its overall manufacturing ability, manufacturing potential, because see, again, these are just facilitative measures. This particular corridor can only facilitate. It has to be focused that India gives due importance to its manufacturing potential so that it can capitalize upon this aspect. With IMEC, India aims to position itself as a global supply chain alternative. So it can only happen if the country takes steps towards enhancing its manufacturing competitiveness. This is very important. So finally, it's also the time to establish the IMEC Secretariat. This can make the structure and working of the IMEC more organized. The Secretariat can work on developing the framework for streamlining the cross-border trade, empirical evidence-based research, and this would then lead to benefits accruing to different countries in the region. Right? Help countries in the neighborhood of the corridor to better understand the project. Again, the overall gist is there are issues with respect to the project, primarily in the western part, but the eastern part is doing well. So till the situation in the western part normalizes, we have to focus upon strengthening the domestic manufacturing competitiveness and also the logistics efficiency, right? And we should also focus upon these steps, for example, institutionalizing the Secretariat for the IMEC. So this is what the article talks about. So coming to the next article, this is with respect to the global carbon budget. Now this particular report gives very important numbers. Now these numbers can be really important once you're writing the mains exam. Now this article is important because the report has been published in the backdrop of the COP29 summit, right? So we'll see what different elements of these reports are and how different countries are faring when we talk about the global CO2 emissions, right? So while countries have congregated in Baku for the COP29 to cut the carbon emissions, a peer-reviewed report by Scientist Collective has found that the carbon emissions are set to rise 0.8% in 24 over the last year, right? If you compare it with 2023. Now, this is lower than 1.2% rise in 23, which was that compared to 2022. Now, in 2023, the largest absolute contributions to global fossil carbon dioxide emissions were from China, 31%. So this is a very important information. It can be there can be a probable question in the prelims which talks about that which of the following countries are the highest producers of the global carbon dioxide emissions, right? So just see. So we have got China at 31%, United States at 13%, India at 8%. Then we have got the European Union 27 at 7%. Now, these four regions account for 59% of the global fossil CO2 emissions, rest of the world contributing 41%. The global per capita fossil CO2 emissions was 1.3 tons in 2023, carbon per person per year. This number was 3.9 for the US, 2.3 for China, 1.5 for EU 27 and 0.6 for India. Fossil emissions are expected to increase by 4.6% in India and 0.2% in China, right? China is expected to emit 12 billion tons of carbon dioxide. India is expected to emit 3.2 billion tons. US is expected to emit 4.9 billion tons. So if you just look at this image, we have the US it basically emitted 5 billion tons in the year 2021, and it is actually lowering to 4.9. Then we have got India, then we've got China, which actually emitted 11.4 billion tons in 2021, and now it is projected to emit 12 billion tons in 2024. And then we have got India, which emitted 2.7 billion tons in 21, and it is projected that it would emit 3.2 billion tons in 24, right? The global carbon budget, the collective of approximately 120 scientists, they publish basically the annual peer-reviewed estimates for changes in the atmospheric carbon and the broad causes. Emissions from coal, oil and gas in 24 are expected to be slightly above their 2023 levels by 0.2%, 0.9% and 2.4%. So these are the sector-wise emissions of the CO2, right? Global CO2 emissions from land use changes and forestry averaged 1.1 billion tons of carbon per year. The concentration of CO2 is set to reach 422.5 parts per million in 2024, which is 52% above the pre-industrial levels. This particular data can be really important. The impacts of climate change are becoming increasingly dramatic. We still see no sign that burning of fossil fuel has peaked. Time is running out to meet the Paris Agreement goals, and the world leaders meeting at COP29 must bring about rapid and deep cuts to fossil fuel emissions. Then the Paris Agreement explicitly states that the world must strive to prevent temperatures from exceeding 2 degrees Celsius of the pre-industrial levels. Global conversation since 2020 has moved towards the section of the agreement that says strive to keep it under 1.5 degrees Celsius. Voluntary carbon reductions, also known as the nationally determined contributions, they basically project reducing the emissions aligned with 1.5 degree pathway. The GCB report is basically pessimistic, and it says that there is just 50% chance that the remaining carbon budget or the quantity of the carbon that can be held in the atmosphere before the 1.5 degree Celsius target is reached consistently in about 6 years. In January 2024, the mean global temperature recorded over the previous 12 months crossed that mark. Now, this is leading to serious irreversible changes. So we have got the rise in the level of the carbon dioxide emissions. It is leading to the overall rise in the temperature, and then it is leading to irreversible changes with respect to the planet, right? Now, this particular article talks about the very important global carbon budget. Now, this is a comprehensive effort to assess and track the global carbon cycle, identifying the sources and sinks of carbon dioxide across the world, published annually by the Global Carbon Project. Now, this can be important for your prelims, right? The budget synthesizes the data on human-caused and natural emissions of the carbon dioxide, helping policymakers, researchers, and the public understand the state of global emissions and climate mitigation efforts. So we have got the Global Carbon Project. Key components of the Global Carbon Budget. First is fossil fuel and cement emissions. So they are calculated by fuel type and by country, right? As we just saw that, like which all countries, for example, we had China, we had India and US, right? And then we also saw by coal, by fossil fuel and the other sectors, right? Land use change emissions from deforestation, agriculture and other land use changes. CO2 sinks, the role of oceans and terrestrial ecosystems in absorbing carbon dioxide, emissions from international trade. This also takes into account the emissions associated with the consumption of goods in different countries, which are not always reflected in the national emissions inventories. Additionally, the Global Carbon Atlas provides an interactive visualization of these data, offering insights into the trends and projections related to the carbon emissions. So we also have other aspect, that is Global Carbon Atlas. Now, it basically gives the data in a better visualization, right? So that it is more comprehensible. It is aimed at policymakers, scientists, and public, helping track about how human activities contribute to climate change. So this is what you need to know with respect to this particular article. Now, coming to the next article, this is with respect to the India Human Development Survey. Now, this was conducted by the University of Maryland and the National Council for Applied Economic Research. Now, this tries to give you the status of women, primarily from the time period 2011-12 and 2022-24, right? So it gives a very important data and gives the reason why you have low participation of women in the economic workforce, right? So as economists struggle to explain the stagnation in women's participation in the wage work in India, the conservative social norms have emerged as a handy target to explain why rising economic prosperity has not translated into greater employment for women, right? So we generally say that it is because of the conservative social norms that we don't see that there is the participation of women in the overall workforce, greater participation of women in the workforce. So this assumption of social stagnation has little basis in reality. The India Human Development Survey, which was, as I just told, it was carried by University of Maryland and National Council for Applied Economic Research, has tracked the changes in the lives of Indian households between 2004 and 24. This survey of over 42,000 households tries to give the steady changes with respect to the Indian women's life. Now, again, the overall, the time basis is from 2011, 12 and 22 and 24. So Indian parents over this decade, in this particular decade, Indian parents have increased their investments in developing their daughters' capabilities. Parental aspirations for their children, for both sons and daughters, has grown rapidly, resulting in a massive increase in education. Today, the gender gap in education has virtually disappeared. This is a very important information. In 2011-12, the IHDS found 27% of 20 to 29 years old women had completed class 12th and only 12% had a college degree. In 22-24, more than 50% had completed the class 12th and 26% had a college degree. More importantly, there was no difference between the proportion of young men and young women with a college degree. This increase in girls' education was accompanied by delayed marriages. So in 2011-12, 76% of the women in their 20s were married. By 2022-24, the proportion had dropped to 66%. Marriage remains a family affair, but whereas only 42% of the young women in 2012 had any input in selecting their partners, by 2022, 52% did. Premarital contact between spouses, primarily in the form of phone, WhatsApp or email, right? Now in 2011, 30% of the women met their husbands before marriage and 27% connected via phone, WhatsApp or email. By 2022, this proportion was 42% and 54% respectively. While 23% of the young women in 2012 thought of having more sons than daughters was essential, the proportion had fallen to 12% by 2022. Now this tries to give you basically the social transformations which are taking place, especially when we consider the women in India. Young women also began to expand their connection with the world. The proportion of women who felt comfortable traveling a short distance by bus or train, it grew from 42% to 54%, and the membership in the self-help groups, it increased from 10% to 18% for women in their 20s. Even the political engagements increased slightly. In 2012, 6% attended political meeting of a Gram Sabha or ward committee. In 2022, this proportion was 8%. These are not revolutionary changes, and women continue to negotiate their lives with various constraints. But the sum total of these changes reflects the ongoing transformation. However, one area where the transformation has not even begun relates to economic opportunities. Women continue to contribute to the economy by working on family farms. And the PLFS survey, the Periodic Labor Force Survey, has documented a substantial increase in this work. However, participation by women in the wage labor has stagnated. So though they are actually participating in the farms, but in the wage labor, their participation is not being reflected. The proportion of 20 to 29-year-old women in the wage labor was 18% in 2012, falling to 14% in 2022. Now, this is a situation which is concerning, right? This is a concerning situation. Due to increased college enrollments, it can be because of the increased college enrollments, but even for women in their 30s, participation in the wage labor has stagnated. The new economic orthodoxy tells us that women low level of employment are because of restrictive social norms that look down on families where women work, right? However, among the married women who were not employed, 73% in 2011 said that they would be happy to work if they could get a suitable job. And this proportion had grown to 80% in 2022. Moreover, what the data says is that 72% of the families, they said that they would allow them to work if they could find a suitable jobs. Again, there is a case study with respect to Manrega, right? Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. When Manrega started, it paying women the same amount as men, women jumped in this particular work with both feet to seek out even manual work. Today, more women work under Manrega than men. Improvements in the transportation systems have also contributed to increase non-farm work by women. Of the 4 key areas that define women's empowerment, that is personal efficacy, power in intra-household negotiations, societal engagement, and access to income-generating activities, we see improvements in the first 3 domains. But in the 4th domain, that is access to employment, it has stagnated. It is time to invite India's daughters to partake in the fruits of economic development. So what the author is trying to say is that though there has been improvements in different aspects, again, there is one particular aspect, that is the contribution of females in the country when we talk about the wage labor, right? So that is actually stagnated, and we really need to bring in those policies which can basically enhance their contribution in the labor force. That is what you need to know with respect to this particular article. So coming to the last article of the day, this is with respect to an explained article which is there in the Indian Express. Now this talks about the Conference of Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, how it basically evolved, what were the milestones which were achieved, what have been the successes, what have been the loopholes, and what should we expect from the COP29 summit, right? So as the article says, the 2024 United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP29, began in Baku. Delegates from 200 countries. So we had different kinds of people, for example, the business leaders, the political leaders, the indigenous people, the journalists. They basically are taking part in this particular summit. The primary goal of 29 is to bring together countries to develop a shared plan to curb the further global warming. Now, the conference would also focus upon the ways to scale up the climate finance. And that is the reason what we are seeing is that COP29 is also being termed as the COP, the finance COP, right? Now, what is this COP, an annual global climate conference? So we have got the Conference of Party. It is an annual meeting of the members of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. It is an international agreement signed in 1992, which has provided a basis for climate negotiations. Now, the UNFCCC commits its members or the parties to act together to stabilize the greenhouse gas concentration at a level which would prevent dangerous anthropogenic, that is human-induced interferences with the climate system. Currently, the number of members are 198, so almost it has a universal membership, right? Constituting near universal membership. The parties, that is, if you go into the membership, we have got 197 countries, and then we have got the European Union. Just remember that. The parties have come together every year since 1995, barring 2020 because of the COVID crisis, to discuss and agree on the international climate policy. Now, one of the significant tasks for the Conference of Parties is to review the national communications and emission inventories. Based on this information, the Conference of Parties assesses the effects of the measures taken by the parties. So we have got the individual actions being taken by the different countries, which are known as the nationally determined contributions, right? And the progress made in achieving the ultimate objective. What have been the various COPs achieved so far? So the first major breakthrough was that of the COP3, that is Kyoto, which was held in Kyoto in 1997, where there was the adoption of the Kyoto Protocol. Now this placed obligations on the rich and industrialized countries to cut their greenhouse gas emissions by assigned amounts. Targets varied by country, but averaged almost 4.2% reduction below the 1990 level by the year 2012. This protocol did not last long because wealthy and powerful countries were not happy with it. The United States, it signed the protocol but never ratified it. At the COP15, that is Copenhagen in 2009, the parties tried to establish a successor to treaty, but the attempt failed. Then we had the second attempt at the COP21 summit that was in Paris in 2015, where finally we had the Paris Agreement, a legally binding international treaty to limit the global temperatures to below 2 degrees Celsius and preferably below 1.5 degrees Celsius. The parties also agreed to different climate action plans and nationally determined contributions, as I just told you. So different countries are having their own commitments, which are known as the nationally determined contributions. The next milestone was in COP26, that is Glasgow in 2021, where the Glasgow Pact was signed. The parties made a commitment to phase down the use of coal and not to phase out, right? This language was weakened from phase out later in the negotiations to phase out the inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. This was the first time that the United Nations Climate Agreement mentioned the coal. At the last year's summit in Dubai, that is COP28, a loss and damage fund was officially launched. And this is primarily meant to basically give financial help to those countries which are struck by climate disasters. What are some of the criticism of the Conference of Parties? See, what people say is that the COP has failed to enable enough emission cuts to put the planet on the pathway of 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius. See, again, different studies have said that the world must cut its emission by at least 43% by 2030 if it wants to basically achieve the 1.5 degree target. But what we are seeing is that emissions are still rising and not yet peaked. Global emissions are projected to be just 2% below the 2019 level in 2030 instead of 43%, which is actually required. Next is the Conference of Parties have also been unable to provide climate finance to developing nations. For instance, in 2009, the wealthiest countries, which are disproportionately responsible for the climate crisis, they promised to raise 100 billion every year from 2020 onwards, but this has not materialized, right? To help the developing countries, nations reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and adapt the impact of the climate change, but they have failed to deliver on this aspect. And that is the reason what we see is that the least developing countries and the developing countries, what we are focusing upon is CBDR, right? Common but differentiated responsibilities, where the developed countries, they basically are responsible for this majority of the climate brunt which we are facing, and therefore they need to take the responsibility of mitigating and adapting to the effects of climate change, and therefore they have to provide adequate financial and technological transfers to the least developed and developing countries. What should be expected out of COP29? Climate finance is at the top of the agenda. New collective quantified goal, NCQG, very important. Now, this is a new amount that must be mobilized by developed countries every year from 2025 onwards to finance the climate action in developing countries. The new figure has to be more than the $100 billion, which was basically actually promised in the 2009, in the COP 2009, right? But the talks over the NCQG have not made much progress. Parties disagree on almost every element of the fund, including the amount of money that needs to be raised and who should contribute, right? Now, it remains to be seen what would happen. Therefore, the negotiations in the COP29 are really important, and then they would basically decide that how different countries charter the progress towards eliminating the ill effects of the climate change and how the developed countries would contribute in the terms of finances and technological transfers. So that is it for today. I hope you really enjoyed the session. All the best. Thank you. Let us know through your likes and comments.